Welcome to Coffee with TrueCentive, 30 minutes of incentive automation tips, tricks, and best practices. My name is Jim Meyer, and today's coffee we're going to cover how to use incentives to drive greater engagement for meetings, events, demos, and surveys. We'll also talk a little bit about how your peers are using incentives to drive their success. Before we do get started, we respect your time. Our coffees are always under 30 minutes. We'd also like to keep them educational, so there's no sales pitch. We also want to keep them current, so if you do have a suggestion for a future Coffee with TrueCentive, please feel free to send it to marketing@truecentive.com. Most of our coffees are based on our listener input. Your questions are welcome. We'll get to as many as possible. If we don't get to your questions in the 30-minute time slot, we'll be sure and follow up via email or schedule a call with you. And we will have a recording of the presentation available to you to share with your peers on Monday. For today's coffee, we're going to start out with why incentives work and how to use them to increase the perceived value of our event. Then we'll go a little deeper into some of the tactics that marketers are using to enhance these types of programs. We'll follow that with a little information about letting your recipients choose and the benefits associated with that, followed by timing your incentive delivery, your reminders, even follow-up messages, and then lastly we'll close out with the economics of rewards and incentives, just so that you can look at this and determine, is the process that you're following the best way to use your incentive dollars to enhance these types of programs. Let's talk about why incentives work. Many marketers view incentives as a bribe that influences the wrong people or the wrong behavior, and this certainly can be true. If your incentive value is too high or we have the wrong audience, that definitely can be the case. Audience should have an existing need and or interest, and they should be decision makers or influencers. Incentives work because they increase the value or the balance between the benefit the participant is going to receive compared to the request you're making. The object of the incentive is to tip that balance, and this is often an emotional decision. Movement is typically an allocation of time now versus time in the future, and that time in their mind is the perceived future cost of meetings and other engagements as well. An incentive should not be the main reason for them to take action. The goal is improving the presentation of your meeting request by adding a little additional value to get that movement early. Value should be based on the lifetime value of that customer when you're considering what that incentive should actually be. Determining the incentive value for your program is probably one of the biggest challenges you're going to face. On this chart, you can see a variety of different programs that you might be running, and they're weighted against the intrinsic value to your audience and the audience time and resources required to attend that particular event. It can be difficult to figure out what the perception is of your audience. Different organizations have different numbers of people who will be involved. The length of process can vary greatly between organizations, and it's not, once again, just this event, but any other follow-on activities that they feel are associated with this. And then everyone has different time constraints and values their time differently. If you're running an educational webinar and the content is applicable to the recipient, the intrinsic value will be high, and the necessary incentive to get them there will likely be much lower. If you have a famous speaker like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, the value goes through the roof and you probably need no incentive whatsoever. A good approach is to run your invites in tranches with increasing values over time until you get to your desired audience size. Let's start with increasing attendance at meetings. You have a lot of options to get creative with regarding your invite and the incentive that goes along with it. Some things to consider are what type of meeting is it and who are the attendees? What would motivate that audience? Would it be Top Golf, other sporting events, electronics, fine dining? The second is the venue. Is this going to be an in-person meeting? Will it be virtual? Is it going to be in conjunction with a trade show or other type of event? This can help you determine how you want to present that incentive. Do you want to provide it on the front end, before the meeting with the hope that they'll come, during the meeting, or after the meeting? A lot of this goes into the type of business and the personality of your group hosting that meeting, as well as the audience. One thing to consider is that adding a theme to a meeting can really help take away some of the anxiety that some individuals might have with receiving incentives. This is called gift guilt. Recipients want to be helpful, so they may feel like they don't deserve the incentive, but that can also cause them not to come to the meeting or attend the meeting or accept the meeting. Incentives tied to an overall program with a theme lessens the focus on the actual incentive and more on the theme and the meeting. I just want to spend a couple more minutes on timing. There are three strategies typically used for timing your incentive. The first one is promise. This is the most common approach. This is 85 to 90% of all incentives. That's where somebody attends an event, meeting, or webinar, and you follow up with that promised incentive. The next one is prepaid, and this is typical of lunch and learns, coffees with us, or a pizza cast because you need to provide those cards to those individuals so that they can get their meal. And typically, if it's virtual, it's going to be a DoorDash, Grubhub, or Uber Eats options where they pick whatever they prefer. And then finally, you have live. And this can be done in a variety of ways. It can be done in person or virtually. And you can do a couple of other things that are kind of interesting, like using a gated delivery where you deliver incentive in advance. And when they come to the meeting, you provide the code for that particular incentive. I just want to go through some really quick examples. These are from templates from our library. This is a promised example, and this is the delivery of the incentive after an event. On the left, you can see the initial email that delivers that incentive. It can be any design you wish. You can change everything about it. And then on the right, you have the recipient page. In this case, it is an Amazon card. However, it could be any group of cards, any single card that you choose to deliver for that particular event. Here's an example for prepaid. This is delivering the incentive before the event. In this case, it's a lunch and learn. And on the right, you can see the email template. It lets them know that they have a DoorDash, Grubhub, or Uber Eats choice. They can go from that email to the recipient page to claim which cards they prefer. And it includes instructions to order lunch by 11:45 for the lunch and learn to start at noon. Here's an example of a live redemption. And on the left, you can see it has two elements. It has schedule my appointment online and then enter my code. So rather than redeem the code right away, we have a gated or what we call a locked gift. And so when that individual attends that appointment, the host will provide the code and they can redeem it right there on the spot. They can also choose to go ahead and just take the code and redeem it at a later time. Incentives are a great way to motivate for almost any type of meeting. Incentives for one-on-one meetings are the most common. They're easy to manage. They work well in almost any venue. The volume of one-on-one meeting incentives went up dramatically with the onset of COVID, and now we're seeing it spread across all meeting types. Some other things you might want to consider. For group meetings, you probably want to give everyone the same amount if it is in person. People tend to talk and you don't want to create an uncomfortable situation where a guest feels slighted. For some events like roundtables where you may have to have incentives that are different for different guests to get them to either attend or moderate, you may want to consider providing incentives post-meeting, and that way you can avoid that potential uncomfortable situation. If you're using incentives to drive attendance for large meetings like company all hands meetings, locked incentives can be a fun way to handle it. If you send out a locked incentive prior to the meeting with the promise of a code at the meeting, it can create interest and drive attendance. But make sure you allocate some time for that redemption process. Once you announce that code at the meeting, everyone's going to pick up their phone, and so you need just to consider that as part of the meeting time. Meeting incentives for channel partners to drive sales meetings for your organization can be very effective. And these work especially well if you provide an incentive for both your channel salesperson as well as give them an incentive as a tool to entice the potential customer they're courting for that meeting. Themes are a great way to add a little dimension to your program. You can have event themes. It could be lunch, coffee. If it's a live event or you're at a trade show, you can tie it in that way. Or you can have incentive themes targeted at your audiences, more around sports or tech or fine dining. Really depends on what you want to do and how you want to tie it in. But once again, it's a great way to take away some of that reception anxiety that some people might have with regard to receiving an incentive. And it can add a little fun and give you a way to differentiate your overall marketing for an event that might be maybe a little mundane. As I mentioned earlier, choice can be a great way to expand the attractiveness of your offering to a broader audience. Not everyone might want to have just an Amazon card. So, for example, if you're doing a lunch and learn, you might want to do DoorDash, Grubhub, and Uber Eats because people have different apps and may not want to add another app to their phone. Having DoorDash on your phone already and offering DoorDash may be very attractive, help you get those individuals to that meeting or event. If you're doing a technology-based event, it might be technology cards that you're offering, or if it's fine dining you want to offer. You've got lots of options to do this and increase the attractiveness of your particular program. Now, that said, choice to a degree is a good thing. Providing too much choice can also negatively impact your program. What you'll find is very often if you offer too many choices, people will, even if they choose the same card that they would choose from a small group of choices, a large group tends to make people second guess their choice. And we don't want any negative feelings, any second guessing with regard to the incentive they chose. So you want to make it easy, but you want to give enough choice. And typically that's around 6 cards is kind of the magic number. Now, if you're doing international, you might have to give a broader choice because you've got lots of different countries, and it just makes it easier on you to deliver the same program to all countries where the recipients can choose their country and choose the card of their choice. It looks like virtual events are here to stay, and the good news is they're getting better as organizations gain more experience and the tools are getting a lot better. However, we have some of the same issues we do with online meetings, and that's we have Zoom fatigue, your audience isn't captive, they have distractions. So it's a great opportunity to use incentives to drive a higher level of engagement. And you can emulate a lot of the activities of in-person events, breakout sessions, raffles, other types of activities, coffee breaks, lunches, cocktail parties, and go beyond the normal virtual event and add a lot of the elements of a live event, incentivizing people and that participation using incentives. Demos are one of the most effective forms of engagement, and they're similar to meetings, but the request is usually greater, and it's because there's that acknowledgement that this is much as of a sales as it is an educational process. And the goal is to use that incentive to tip the balance to get those commitments sooner so that you're staying one step ahead of the competition. The first company that meets a customer requirement typically has a 15% greater chance of winning that business. So getting that demo and getting it ahead of the competition is key. Another way you can use incentives in conjunction with demos is post-demo incentives. They can be very effective for getting feedback. If you've ever done a demo and you've been ghosted and you don't know what happened, was it the demo process, was there feature gaps, or maybe it just wasn't a fit altogether, you just don't know. So using an incentive to drive that after demo request helps you get that demo feedback. It also can provide discussion points for next steps and gives you also opportunity to get more feature input for product input for the future. Surveys often have the greatest mismatch between the incentive value and the requester. This is typically because there's this perception difference between the requester who knows the subject matter and the recipient who's taking the survey. Survey questions may be simple to the author but taxing to the client, And we always seem like we want to add one more question to that survey, making it that much longer. The most common issues that surveys are long and the incentive's too small and we get that dropout. Yet if you go too big on your incentive, you'll attract the wrong segment who will fill out the survey just for the incentive. We recommend that you run surveys in tranches where you can get feedback with regard to the response rate and the data quality that you're getting, and then increase the value over time until you get to the right number. Another thing is monetary gifts work much better and are much more effective, like gift cards versus merchandise or coupons. Individual promised after the survey is definitely the way to go. Some people like to think about using sweepstakes. They seem to save time or money, but in reality, the return on investment is typically lower than doing no incentive at all. People are very skeptical about sweepstakes. The other issue you want to pay attention to is there are different requirements on sweepstakes in different states. Finally, adding to the intrinsic value of a survey by offering a report or the data from the survey may be a great way to reduce the incentive value that you have to provide. Typically, surveys are going out to like-minded people, so they may be interested in the content, and therefore, if you do offer that data, they may be more willing to do the study at a lower incentive value. One of the greatest advantages to digital incentive delivery is in that you can automate the process. So here we have an example of an email delivery and or SMS delivery of the incentive. You can do one or both. And as you can see, the initial delivery goes out, and then you can set up a series of reminders. Typically, a reminder would be set for the day one after they've received the incentive, and unless it was had gone out on a Friday and you want to follow up after the weekend. And then series of additional messages can go out over a period of time, whatever you feel is most appropriate. This is most common, 1 day, 3 days, 10 days, and then a final reminder before the expiration of your incentive. Usually you want to give individuals 1 to 5 days warning that their incentive is going to expire, and these are multiple opportunities to reach out to those individuals and remind them that you've sent them something nice, you've sent them an incentive. Each step of the way you can change the look and feel, so they don't all have to be the same. You can get more creative as time goes on and even get fun with the whole process. But once again, one of the big advantages, you get multiple brand impressions as they go through this automated process. In addition to reminders, you also have the option of using follow-up messages. And these messages are triggered after an individual claims their incentive. They can go out 15 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 day, 5 days, whatever you prefer after they have claimed that incentive. And these messages, of course, because they've already claimed their incentive, aren't about the whole claim process. They can be secondary calls to action. You can completely personalize these. They could be a text only message from a salesperson asking for a meeting. They could be a follow-up, take another survey. Maybe it's can you take our net promoter score and tell us how we're doing? HR departments use these very often to follow up with employees after holiday events to find out, we've given you a nice incentive for the holidays. Can you tell us how we're doing? Now, the individual just received an incentive, so they're going to be in a good mood and they're more likely to respond. So this is a great way to keep that engagement process going and just take it one more step to get the maximum utility out of your incentive. Before we get into the economics of incentive deliveries, I wanted to cover redemption rates because they have a major impact on your return on investment for your particular program. If you look at the overall redemption rate across the spectrum, it averages about 80%. That said, you'll find programs that can be as low as 50%, more typically on the marketing side, and up in the high 90s for employee incentives. So it does depend on not only the audience, but the program, and of course the commitment of time and all the other things we talked about earlier in the presentation. But as you can see here, product surveys, product reviews are pretty high. That's going to drop off down to webinars and other things that take more time and a greater commitment. And so just keep this into consideration when you're planning your marketing budget or your sales budget, because this has to do with the money you will get back on unclaimed incentives if you're using a platform like TrueCentive that does give you those dollars back where you only pay for claimed incentives. As promised, we're going to wrap up with the economics of gift cards just to give you some perspective of what you might expect from your program and to help you choose a plan that works best for you. Now, going back to the 80% of on average of gift cards redeemed, we can roll that into our models and determine what the return on investment would be or the total cost at the end of the program. I have three different models up here. The center model, the free delivery, is the most common in the industry. However, it is starting to go away. And this is where we'll send your cards for free. However, you get nothing back on the breakage or those gift cards or incentives that have never been claimed. This is the model that Amazon uses when they send out on their B2B platform, when you send out Amazon cards directly from Amazon. If those cards go into a bad email box, they're never recovered. And we do offer this model, but we don't recommend it. Almost every customer that's ever selected this has moved to the 10% delivery model and then finally up to the volume discount model. The 10% delivery model is very simple, just as it's described. We charge 10% on the value of the incentive you send. However, you get any unclaimed incentives back. If we're going on the 80% model, that puts you 10% ahead of the free delivery model. We also have subscription models that include volume discounts where you would pay 10% up to a maximum amount. In this case, I have a $3 example. We go down to all the way down to $2.25 on our enterprise accounts. There's a subscription fee with those accounts, but if you do the calculations in the long run, if you're a high volume sender, this can be very beneficial and very cost effective. Let me give you just a quick example before we close out. If you sent 10 $50 incentives on the 10% delivery model, that would cost you $450 after you redeemed back or the 20% was returned back to your account. On the free delivery model, you would have spent $500 to deliver that, and that would be your cost. And then on the volume discount model, it would be $430. So as you can see, depending on your volume, the price of your incentives, that will determine what program works best for you, depending on your scale. So just something to think about when you're selecting a model for your incentive delivery programs. Well, that concludes our coffee for today. It does look like we have time for questions. We have a lot of questions, so don't worry. If we don't get your question, we'll be sure to follow up after the coffee. The first question is, what is the ideal incentive amount for a lunch and learn? This is an interesting question because it's changing. It has gone up a little bit, but the baseline is typically $35 to $40. Remember, we have to include the delivery costs in that equation. It also will depend on the audience. If you're talking to warehouse staff versus executives, they'll have very different expectation. If the value of the sale is high and you offer a not so great lunch, it's not going to play very well. For virtual lunch and learns, you don't have to give the same value to everyone. You can add different values associated with each attendee at the time that you send out those lunches prior to your lunch and learn. For those of you who have run lunch and learns in person, you know this is much more cost effective, and virtual events are just a fraction of the cost of the amount of time and effort, as well as the cost of a meal of an in-person event. The next question is, how long do you have to follow up with incentives? Sooner is always better. That time when that recipient is waiting for their incentive or reward can elicit potentially negative thoughts about never receiving that promised incentive, and we want to avoid that at all costs. We never want negative feelings, especially when it's early in our engagement process. So sooner is always better, and that's one of the big advantages to digital and automating your incentive process. The next question is, if offering recipient choice, should I list all the cards in my request? No, you don't need to list all your cards. We provide a library of all the card images, and you can use those in your engagement emails. But a representative sample works really well, and this is especially true if you're doing an event like a lunch or a tech talk or a coffee, and you're doing a theme. You can put in just a group of cards that you're going to offer, and then when they go to that recipient choice, they can see all the detailed selection. You just want to give them a sample or a feeling of what you're going to be offering. It does look like that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you. Please be sure to look for our next Coffee with TrueCentive. Have a great day. Take care.